Hello and welcome to my channel Inspiring Life Changes. My name's Colette and I'm here today to do the astrology read for the new moon in Gemini. It's a collective read, it's just the astrology part because I used to do the two together, the astrology and then the tarot, but it was taking too much time, so this is just going to be the astrology rundown. It's taken me all day to do this. I've had lots of stress over this past week. I just haven't been able to find the time, so it is now literally nearly 10 o'clock here in the UK. I'm just starting out this video now. The new moon has already happened. It happened today in the UK at 6:39, so it's already been and gone, but the energy is still here, and it will be here for the next 2 weeks as well until we get round to the full moon. So I'm going to jump right in and say that the new moon in Gemini, I'm calling it the shifting the internal and outer narrative, because I think it's very much about what's going on within us and outside when it comes to communication and the narrative, the bigger narrative that's taking place, shall we say, in the outside world at this moment in time. And there's a reason I'm calling it internal and outer narrative, and I will kind of explain that as I go through the writing. So the moon and the sun are conjunct because it's a new moon, and they're at Gemini 2 degrees and 4 minutes. And I'll give you a quick rundown of the moon. The moon is our emotions, it's our feelings, our deeper awareness, it's our knowing of things, it's the intuition, and it is also known as a feminine energy because of the connection with the monthly cycle of women, mostly to do with. Although it also rules the tides and the cycles, and they're all kind of seen as the feminine energies. But that doesn't mean that men aren't affected by it as well. So the moon reflects the light of the sun as it waxes to full. And once it's got to the full point, it will then start to wane. And as it wanes, it gets smaller until it gets to the point which we know now as the new moon, or also the dark moon. As at this time, the sun and the moon are together, which is why they're conjunct. They're in the same part of the sky. And the moon can no longer be seen. So during the full moon, our emotions are much more charged, and they're kind of out there for all to see. It's kind of that time of the lunacy, and kind of everybody's out there and emotions are usually running high. But at the time of the new moon, our emotions and our feelings are a lot more self-orientated, like more inner, more kind of reflective, a lot more introspective. We tend to be more subdued, and we don't tend to be quite as communicative outwardly. During this new moon in Gemini, we may find ourselves having an increase in internal conversations as well, because Gemini is all about communication, it's all the mind-related energies. So we may be having internal conversations and really starting to question ourselves about how we need to go about making the emotional changes and shifts we are hoping to make within our day-to-day lives. So it's kind of us really questioning ourselves at this moment in time about how we're going to change our emotions from an internal perspective to an outer perspective to actually kind of manifest it outwardly. But first of all, we need to kind of question it within ourselves. So that's really, for me, what this new moon is kind of saying we need to be doing. Gemini is the sign of the twins. So it's a dualistic energy that runs through all of the physical realm, and you can find it in many different ways. It represents all different aspects of ourselves, the light, the dark, the good, the bad, the female, the male, the right, the wrong, the left, the right, and it also reflects on the same level. Our brain is even divided into like the left and the right side as well, and the brain being a lot to do with our communications, it does have a lot to do with the Gemini energy, the Mercury energy as well, which is the ruler of Gemini, of course, which I will also go on to talk about in a bit. Gemini is how we categorize and learn to understand there are two sides to every story. Gemini is the logical thinking aspect of our character and personality. It influences how we communicate to others through education and teaching, as we are all constantly being influenced by other people's knowledge or lack of knowledge on a daily basis, regardless of our age. So we're all kind of learning, even though we may not be kind of sitting in a school or university or a college. It's kind of like, you know, you meet people and you connect with them and you communicate how you are feeling, or even what you know, your knowledge or wisdom on things. That's all kind of the Gemini side of things, the kind of sharing, if you like, of communication with two people, or even more than two people. But Gemini is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is going to be conjunct with Venus during this full moon at 20 degrees, and Venus is now retrograde. So she's now taking a long, slow look at everything to do with our relationships and values, up until the end of July. So we've got right up until the end of July for Venus being retrograde and kind of really going deeper into the whole questioning of our relationships and our values to do with our relationships as well. But we are also being asked to do so from a very intellectual viewpoint. So because it's Gemini, it's kind of like we are having to remove our emotions from this situation, from our kind of, normally it would be, our emotions would be probably clouding an issue, or they can cloud an issue because we are emotionally attached to things. So we're being asked to kind of see things from a more logical, kind of clearer intellectual side of looking at things. And while I was writing this, I was getting a really strong image of the goddess of Athena, who was the goddess of logic and analysing things, very much to do with discerning. Athena was born from the head of Zeus, so she didn't have any of that emotional kind of connection to anything. She wasn't connected on an emotional level. It was like just the intellect. It was pure intellect. That's how it was seen, because it was very Greek, and the Greek kind of put the intellect and academia in that sense above the emotions, and we have kind of lived in that kind of the same kind of energy, let's say, for a long time, of like, you know, academia being seen as being a lot more value than our emotions are valued. So there's a questioning, and I feel that there's a kind of two sides to this as well. It's like we're having to kind of look at our emotions from a kind of third person party point of view, if you like. So we're having to kind of remove ourselves from all our emotional relationships and distance ourselves from it in a way, so that we can look into it and not be caught up within the emotional kind of connections or attachments or baggage, or the things that would keep us going over the same ground, over, because Venus is literally going over the same ground because she's retrograde. She's kind of reached a point of going to a certain point in Gemini, and now she's going back the way, and she will once again go forward as well. So it'll be 3 times over that same energy point. So it's a real emphasis, if you like, on our relationships for the next 4 months, or up until the end of July. So Athena also appears in a lot of tarot decks. She appears in the tarot deck that I use and have used for a long time, the Mythic Tarot deck, as the goddess of justice, the goddess of fairness, because she doesn't have the emotional attachment to any particular outcome. So it's like we're being asked to balance things karmically as well, and to also to be very discerning, because the scales are kind of about balancing, and the sword is kind of being able to use your discernment so that you can make like clear decisions. Yeah, with it, like balance things karmically, but without bringing the emotions into play. What else have I got here? Athena was born, after I said that bit, from the head of Zeus. So she represents the cool, calculated, discerning, collected energy of decision making without an emotional attachment to the outcome, but at the same time in a harmonious fashion which will best suit our emotional needs in the long run. So we may, at this time of the new moon, find ourselves being pulled in 2 very different directions, and really having to question the decisions and choices that have led us to where we are now, both on an individual level and on a bigger, more collective level as well. We need to look around and say, kind of like, you know, how did we get here? How did we get to this point in our history that we are now in? And also at the same time asking ourselves, where have our values changed, and how have our values changed? Where, how, and also why have our values changed? Which is also part of the Venus retrograde energy of looking at why we were attached to something maybe before, but we're not so much anymore, because our values have changed as well. So the Gemini energy can be incredibly impulsive, as well as very changeable. So we may find ourselves jumping and leaping backwards and forwards many times in our heads before we can come to any real satisfying conclusions about anything at this time. It can also be very sharp-tongued and sharp-witted, with a strong ability for discernment, which I think is kind of a major issue here. It keeps coming through for me, this kind of discerning energy. We need to kind of learn to discern what is good, what is not so good for us, what do we value, what do we not value, what don't we need anymore, what do we want to continue or bring with us into our future. The element of Gemini is air, which in the tarot cards relates to swords energy. So it can also at this time mean cutting out the things in our lives that no longer have the value they may once have done, or cutting away the past that is no longer worthy of our time and attention, particularly around relationships, because it's Venus related, so it is relating to relationships. You may also find at this time that past relationships could return as well. Often when Venus goes retrograde, it will bring back past relationships. Doesn't have to be intimate relationships, it can be other kinds of friendships, even family relationships. And you may feel very strongly the need to communicate things that you may not have been able to communicate before, or you didn't feel you had all the information for, perhaps, as well, so you couldn't communicate it fully. This could be a time now when old relationships, or relationships that you thought had kind of done their time, are being kind of brought back to either work through, or to finally kind of cut them out and say, it's not going to be healthy for me. I need to kind of move beyond this now. However, we have both Mercury and Venus also conjunct in Gemini. So we've got Venus in Gemini, and conjuncting Gemini at the same time is the energy of Mercury. So during this new moon, we do seem to have like pairs of planets kind of working together. It's quite an interesting setup, because it is Gemini dualistic energy as well. And Mercury, of course, is that energy of the intellect and academia and the head, and Venus is very much all about the emotions and the feelings, and so very kind of opposite energies again. And so although it is challenging, and Mercury and Venus are also squaring over to Neptune at the same time. So Neptune is in Pisces at 20 degrees and 41 minutes. And this is a challenging energy in its makeup because it is a square energy. But it's not a hard square, because Neptune kind of has no boundaries. Neptune is kind of, it's literally kind of nebulous and kind of never-ending energy, if you like. I kind of think of it as a kind of sky that just goes on forever. There is no end to be seen. And so Neptune doesn't want to be boxed in either. It's not an energy that you can kind of put into a structure, whereas, say, an energy like Capricorn likes and needs that kind of structure. Pisces energy, Neptune energy, really needs to be able to just kind of float around in some ways. You know, it needs to just be able to be, and to just experience as much as it can. It's the very dreamy, subconscious, poetic energy, creative energy. And if you kind of try and, all good artists or all good creative individuals know that you can't kind of pin down that energy. You have to kind of let it be and let it flow and let it kind of do and take you where it is that it wants to go, rather than you trying to take it where you want it to go, because it doesn't work that way. And so I feel that this energy, this squaring energy with Neptune, is also relating to the narrative of the unknown circumstances that are so prevalent around us at this moment in time. There is so much of an unknown quantity at this moment in time, and a lot of that is about this Neptune energy, because, like I was saying, Neptune is so nebulous, you can't pin it down, you can't see it. It's a sign of where, things you can't see. It's the unknown. It's just like mysterious. It's kind of to do with esoteric things, the unknown. It's just very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very, kind of out there energy. Because Neptune is one of the further out planets as well, so it's kind of more distant to us, and we don't really know a lot about Neptune, the planet itself, either. So Neptune is still in its home sign of Pisces, which is the 12th house energy of surrendering, letting go, in order for something better to come in. And in the tarot deck, again, this is the Pisces energy of the Hangman. And the Hangman is asked to willingly sacrifice something to make space for a new vision, idea, or creative endeavour. And I believe this is where we stand at present, kind of hanging in limbo land, in a place of stagnated energy, which we are being asked to release the past, as it has taken us as far as it can, as far as we can go with it. It's like we've reached a point of kind of no return, and we really do have to kind of just let go and just allow ourselves to submerge into that kind of Neptune energy and trust the bigger picture, if you like. Trust the bigger energy itself. So Mercury is also the ruler of the day-to-day media and news that we hear and are constantly being bombarded with at the moment. But Neptune is saying it's time to tune out and go within and trust our own instincts and intuition and feelings. And we're being asked if what we feel resonates with what we are hearing. So is it something that we're relating to? Is it on the same level as we are? Are we vibrating with what we're being told? Or does it feel discordant? Does it feel very wrong to us? Those are the kind of questions that we're having to ask ourselves, being asked. And also, does it allow us to vibrate at a higher frequency? Are we being dragged down into a lower one? Is it time to open up to a whole new narrative and question with a much more discerning mind the stories we are being given? And with Venus also squaring Neptune too, we are being challenged to open up to love and let go. Surrender the fear, to allow the divine sacred energy to take us to where we need to be collectively and individually. And that's really what Neptune and Pisces, the 12th house energy, represents. It represents that kind of end of the cycle. It's like when you reach the end, it's the 12th house, it's the last house. So it's kind of, you've reached the end of something. You have to then kind of let it go in order to be able to have something new come in. And so we also have in the sign of the fishes, which incidentally swim in opposite directions and represent the human form, ego, going as one against the tide and struggling to get anywhere. So it's kind of seeing the human race as kind of all swimming, not everybody, but the vast majority of the human race has for so long kind of swum against the tide of what the energy, or where the energy is trying to take us. We're kind of going, no, but we want to go over there, and kind of this divine energy say, no, but you know, if you go this way, it will be so much easier. But in our stubborn humanness, so to speak, we're going, no, I know what I'm doing, I know where I'm going in that direction. And so we're swimming against the tide and struggling against the tide because it feels right to us. Because our ego is saying, this is how it should be. This is how you're supposed to do things. It's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to like make you struggle. If you don't struggle and if it isn't hard, then, you know, is it going to feel like an achievement? And to most of us, it doesn't, because we're so used to having to kind of force ourselves into situations where we end up struggling and kind of, again, forcing that energy. So the other fish It represents the spiritual or the spirit energy body, which flows with the current and the stream of life, as the soul already knows its purpose. The soul already knows where it's going, and it knows that it's here to achieve something on a higher level. That's why it's here. It's not about the mundane day-to-day things. It's about something much bigger. It's about the bigger picture. It's about the collective. It's about the ongoing kind of story, if you like. And we are all just kind of small individual parts or fishes in that kind of huge ocean swimming about. And the soul is kind of saying, you know, every now and again the soul will kind of knock on the door and kind of remind us in a way of why we're here and what we're supposed to be remembering, really. But it's only when we learn to completely let go and surrender that we can truly find that inner peace and happiness. And at this moment in time, I feel that that's kind of, again, the energy that we're in as a collective. We're in this kind of collective energy of, you know, we can't control what is happening. We have to kind of go with it. We have to kind of surrender to it, because it is eventually going to take us to where we need to go if we can trust that that's what's happening, and trust the bigger, like the divine energy, the sacred purpose, because there's a much bigger purpose behind all of this at this time. So, and this is also where Mars finds itself at this time, at this new moon. And Mars is not the happiest of souls in the sign of Pisces, 12th house. And so when so much, at a time when so much around us seems unbearable and wrong, and we feel like we need the courage of our convictions to stand up and fight the good fight for ourselves and for others and for humanity in general, for all the kind of misdeeds that we're seeing and all the kind of controlling actions we're seeing happening around the world, and all the kind of limitations that are being put on us, and being told this is how this is and you don't get a say in it and you've got to behave like this and we say so because we've got the authority to do so. Mars has just entered into the watery inner depths of the subconscious realm. So it's almost like an irony in a way, at a time when we really on some level feel as though we need to take action and actually change the dynamic of what's happening on the planet. Mars, the planet of action, the planet of the kind of, you know, the fire and the passion, the drive, the kind of inner warrior, the courage, the outer warrior, the heroism that goes along with the Mars energy. It's decided that now's the best of times to kind of submerge itself, which I always say, into that deeper, watery, subconscious realm, as I was saying. And so Mars is also having to surrender to the bigger sacred divine energy and trying to understand it, and trying to understand why, you know, which flows through all of life as well, and why and how that process happens, how it's almost like a, you know, kind of going deeper within the whole understanding of how it all began, how we got here, how kind of like, you know, we're still birthed from the waters, and it's like that process of realization that underneath it, it's the kind of what's underneath, it's not so much what's on the surface and what we're aware of, it's the kind of the deeper level layer of life that doesn't come out as often as the kind of, you know, day-to-day surface stuff that we all deal with on a regular basis. And so Mars is being asked to let go of what he has been through over these last 2 years, as Mars has now reached the end of his cycle, 12th house being the end of the cycle. And Mars takes 2 years to go right the way around the whole of the zodiac. So he's reaching the end of that cycle before he goes into his home sign of Aries. He has to kind of go through that surrender, that letting go, that almost like the birthing in a way, you know, kind of being born again in some respects, because Aries is all about the new and the kind of beginnings of things. And so in order to kind of start something new and begin something, Mars is kind of having to let go of all of that stuff that he's kind of picked up over the last 2 years. You know, all that crap, all that baggage. It's all, you know, time for him to let it go, to release it and kind of give it over to the kind of sacred divine energy and kind of say, here, this is what has been happening, this is what it's all about, and now it's time to move forward without all that, you know, with the learning process that's gone on behind all of this as well. Mars is also having to let go of his masculine ego as well, as it is represented through the kind of Aries masculine driving energy, and to free himself from those past burdens and hand it all over to the universe, so he no longer has to carry it. And Mars is also at 6 degrees and is making a sextile over to Uranus in Taurus. And so a sextile is kind of, it's 60 degrees angle, so it's quite an easygoing energy, but it does depend on the planets that are involved as well. So Uranus at this time is also kind of blasting Mars with a sudden new and kind of electrifying realization that things are not as they used to be. It's like, you know, you've gone round this zodiac, it's taken you 2 years to go through each of these signs and to kind of, you know, experience all these different connections with other planets and all these different energies that are kind of felt through us in many ways. And now Uranus is kind of saying, look, buddy, things have changed. You know, when you come out of this process that you're going to go through, this kind of almost like an underworld process, almost like a, but it's not quite in the same way, but it is a kind of submerging. It's all, I see it more as kind of like, you know, like a big bath, like, you know, just kind of staying in the bath for a long time. You know, it's like you just submerge yourself deeply into that kind of energy, and you just relax and just go with the energies of letting it go, and kind of, you know, it's the same kind of thing for Mars at this moment in time. It's like Mars is just sinking himself into this kind of bath, but at the same time for Mars it's very murky area because it's to do with emotions and kind of deeper inner feelings, and Mars doesn't really understand them on a kind of active level. You know, they're kind of very opposite energies again. Mars being the warrior and all about courage and passion and bravery and, like I was saying, heroism. Mars kind of doesn't really understand the emotional world, the kind of deeper inner feelings, which are much more a kind of feminine priority, I suppose. I'm not quite sure if that's the right word, but they're more of a kind of, because feelings are more receptive, they're more something that you it's like receiving, whereas Mars is much more outer. So he's having to try and come to terms with all of this at this time. And he's also got, at the same time as Uranus blasting him with this kind of energy of change and, you know, electrifying shock treatment in a way, he's also got the Sun and the Moon squaring across to him at the same time. And it feels to me like Mars is again being challenged, because it's a square, to go deeper within himself and submerge into the kind of murky depths, as I was saying, this murky feeling realm. And he's going to be there for the next 5 weeks. This isn't just kind of a quick zip through Pisces. This is almost, in some ways, it's like a mini retrograde for Mars, because Mars is a fast moving energy. It's a fast moving planet. It wants to move, it wants to get going, it wants action, it wants doing, and he's not allowed. He's kind of having to put the brakes on, and he's having to kind of just give in and let go and just go, okay, 5 weeks. 5 weeks of being here, you know, make the most of it. It's like, I can't do anything else. I've just got to make the best of it. But like I was saying, Mars doesn't like find that easy. And in the realm of emotions, he understands fire, passion, lust, and sexual like desire and drive, because they're much more the masculine kind of energies. And I'm not saying that that's all men. It can also be something very strongly in women. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about gender. I'm talking about masculine and feminine energies as energies which are found within both genders. So I don't want to get anybody kind of upset about that, because that is not the that's not the narrative that I'm kind of trying to explain here. But that is where Mars is used to coming from, because if you think of Mars as a warrior, that is the kind of thing that warriors are used to kind of doing, of conquering, of kind of like, you know, sexual prowess and being proud of their what's the word? I suppose their conquests. So he can relate to that as an energy, emotional on some level. But the feelings are a totally different level of awareness. But the world has changed, and this is kind of what Uranus is saying. Look, buddy, the world has changed. You know, when you come out of this Pisces energy and you move back into the world, it's different again, you know, and it's now a world that is being asked to kind of, you know, the dominance of one gender over another, which is kind of reflected also with this kind of square from both the divine masculine energy of the sun and the divine feminine energy of the moon, both kind of focusing that square energy on Mars at this time of the new moon. It kind of, for me, saying, you know, the battlefield is about equality in the value of both genders. You know, it's neither one being more important than the other. It's about both having as much right as the other to be equally honoured for our own distinct characteristics as well. So, you know, it's saying that the masculine doesn't have any higher value than the feminine. It's like they're very different, but it doesn't mean that one is better than the other. Or one has more right than the other, but there are certain things that are very masculine or very feminine. Doesn't again mean that it's only going to be found in a woman or only going to be found in a man. Doesn't work that way. And that's something else that we're also kind of going to have to recognise, that we all have both genders within us. You have very masculine but feminine women. You have women who could be very feminine, but at the same time they are very masculine, kind of driven. And you can have very masculine kind of men, but at the same time they may have a real kind of softer, more easy, open, receptive energy, shall we say. So again, yeah, so it's all about, you know, within the physical body of the journey of our soul's growth, because that is really what it's all about. It's about our soul learning as we go through this journey. And this is one of the things that we are needing to kind of incorporate and to learn. It's not about division, it's about unity. It's about recognizing that we are all one, but within that one we also have the different dualistic energies. You know, any kind of electrician, plumber will tell you, you know, you've got male and female points, you know, negative and positive. They come together. If you can't put two negative points together and expect them to work. It doesn't work like that. You know, you have to have that positive and that negative energy to attract, otherwise it just repels. And Mars over this next 5 weeks is really going to be doing a deep soul searching. That's really what this energy is about. It's about going deeper into the soul energy and kind of really searching through that kind of warrior, masculine driven energy, to kind of question himself as well. We will be kind of questioning ourselves about this kind of, I feel, you know, this kind of gender story in particular, and there could be a lot more narrative that comes out about this as well. So interestingly, Mars in Pisces and Venus in Gemini are both in signs that they would rather swap. So they would both be happier in the opposite sign that they're in. And it feels to me that this again is about kind of having to experience from the other side of the coin, so to speak, what it's like to be in the other person's shoes in many ways. Because Venus is having to deal with a very kind of, you know, much more masculine driven, analytical side of the world, because she's stuck in Gemini for the next 4 months. And Mars is having to deal with that much more feminine, much more feeling, sensitive, intuitive side of Pisces energy. So it is like they're having to see each other's point of view. And again, especially because of the connection with the sun and the moon at the moment as well, which is kind of highlighting both those energies even more. And the moon, interestingly again, was also squaring Mars last full moon 2 weeks ago, when we had the full moon in Scorpio. Mars was being squared by the moon then as well. And in that video I kind of said that it felt like the moon was almost kind of preparing Mars for what was coming up. It was almost saying, look, you know, you're about to go into this Pisces energy, because Mars was at the end of Aquarius and getting ready to go into the Pisces energy. And it was almost like the moon was kind of, although it was squaring, it was almost kind of trying to send it some kind of comfort, some kind of like, you know, this is just a taster of what you have coming up to deal with and to cope with. And so yeah, until kind of, you know, it's got to stay there until July, which is going to be for Mars. It's a long whole, is it July? Yeah, because it's there for another 5 weeks, I believe, 6 weeks in all, so it's got to go right the way through all of June until, yeah, it will leave in July and move into Aries, and then it will at some point during that time in Aries go retrograde in its own sign, and will stay there retrograde in Aries, I think, for about 6 months, I think it is in all. It's quite a long retrograde that Mars is going to be staying in, or at least staying in his own sign, like from that whole period up until the end of the year. So it probably won't be retrograde during that whole period, but it will move forward and then it will move retrograde, and then to get out of the Aries energy, it won't happen until the end of the year, kind of thing. So there's going to be a lot of Aries energy in the second half of this year, which is going to completely change the dynamic as well. And so at this time as well, with Mars in Pisces, we are going to feel as though Mars's energy has kind of been put out, like his fire and his drive is kind of going to sleep, kind of being put out. All this water, you know, it's like fire and water don't mix. So we ourselves are going to feel this as well. We're probably going to feel aspects of like not wanting to be bothered, lack of enthusiasm, lack of inspiration, maybe lack of activity in general, just that kind of, oh, you know, I should really go for a walk, but I don't know if I can be bothered, that kind of thing. And so it's all part of the process of letting go as well, that just kind of like not trying to force anything, not trying to make yourself do something if it doesn't feel right, if you don't want to do it, if it just feels too much trouble, then don't do it, really, is the message here. And it's also about not hanging on to the shoulds and the musts of our lives as we've become so used to, you know, oh, I really should do this, I really must do this, and kind of forcing ourselves into these situations that we maybe really did not want to get involved in as well. So ultimately, we are being asked to stop battling through life, to see two sides of the equation and take a different approach. Put down the sword and take off the armour. Relax, take a break and chill. Take a break and chill. Submerge in the deeper world of your subconscious, and you may feel the need to take longer baths at this time as well. You may literally feel that you kind of just want to stay in the bath for as long as you possibly can, just kind of drift off, just allow yourself to kind of go into a different space entirely, just let go of everything and just bliss out. Because this is all about pampering yourself, and it's also about pampering that inner warrior as well. And I kind of feel it and saw it as a picture literally of Mars kind of turning up at this it's like massage parlor type thing, and kind of being put in this big tub of like kind of bubbles and all that kind of stuff, and kind of being left to soak and then getting out and being kind of massaged gently and kind of just relaxing and releasing all of his 2-year baggage that he's been carrying. It's that kind of image of just, you know, letting it all go. So during this new moon, the most dominant energy are the trines. Trining energy is an energy of like an easygoing energy. Because it's trining, because it's like triangles, it kind of flows. It's a kind of really easy flowing energy. And altogether we have got 6 of them, 6 trines, 6 separate trines, but they are made up of 3 sets of 2 pairs. And these 2 pairs are the Sun, divine masculine, And again, the moon, divine feminine. Again, the dualistic energy is kind of really strong at this particular time. And they're both trining over to the powerful trio of Saturn, Jupiter and Pluto. Jupiter is still sat in the middle in Capricorn, as is Pluto. Pluto's still in Capricorn as well, so you've got Jupiter and Pluto both in Capricorn. Pluto's on one side, and on the other side of Jupiter we have Saturn, who is still in Aquarius. For me, this is like Jupiter acting as a guiding light of joy, optimism, faith, hope, in between the darker energies that are more destructive, foreboding, power-seeking, restrictive forces of the two malefics that are also kind of more controlling. I think I said controlling, maybe I didn't say controlling, but there is a controlling element about that as well. And because they're both malefics, Saturn and Pluto, they both work through adversity. And so both the sun and moon trining across to all this energy, which just so happens, of course, to all be retrograde now as well. Saturn, Jupiter and Pluto are all retrograde. It's like the sun is shining a spotlight on this trio of energy, and it's like it wants us to focus our attention here. It wants us to look here because there is something here that is important for us to understand or to see, to realize. And one of the important things or interesting things about this is that Jupiter in the middle is conjuncting with Pluto on one side and Saturn on the other side. And so I also see it hang about, I'll talk about that bit in a minute. I'll just talk through this bit first. So yeah, Jupiter in the middle, Pluto and Saturn are both conjunct Jupiter. So Pluto and Saturn are now outside of each other's influence of orb. They're no longer influencing each other. But it's like those two energies are now channeling all of their energy into Jupiter or through Jupiter. And I kind of see it as Pluto, I'll just tell you briefly that Pluto is now at 24 degrees 49 minutes, which is kind of like more or less 25 degrees, and it's making its way back to the infamous spot of 22 degrees of Capricorn, which at that spot, which I kind of call the tower moment, of January the 12th, which was when our kind of top-down government or governance began to fall and crumble, and everything that how we'd known our life up to that point, if you look back, it was that conjunction of Saturn and Pluto that really changed the world. It really changed the whole dynamic. It was from that kind of point forward that everything kind of started to gather pace and kind of change very rapidly. Both the sun and the moon are bringing in a supportive and reassuring presence at this time to this energy. And they're also, with the sun acting as a spotlight, the sun is kind of revealing more of what has been hidden, because Pluto is all about things that are kept in the dark, the hidden, the underworld, and Saturn is all about governments and governance and kind of top-down control. And the things kind of that have been hidden and kept in the dark from us for a very long time. And today as well, I was kind of told in a way to look at the numbers of that date and to add them together, because I had quite a fascination with numbers anyway, numerology in particular. And if you add the numbers of that date of January being the number 1, and then you've got the 12th, so that's a 3, so that makes a 4, and then you've got 2020, you add those two numbers together as well, you've got 4, so you've got 2 pairs of 4, which also makes 8. And 8, of course, is the number of fate. So the year itself adds up to 4, which is a challenging number. It's that number of the square, the challenge, the hard aspect. And this whole year in 2020 is ruled by the number 4. We are in the number 4 at this time, which is why everything is so difficult at this time and restrictive and kind of blocked in. And so number 4 being the challenge and difficulties and a kind of sign of things to come as well. So altogether, this says to me, this was a date with destiny. It's like 8, the number of fate, the number of destiny. It was like, it was written literally in the stars. You know, it's kind of like it's there. It's, if you understand the hidden deeper meanings of things, then it becomes even more obvious as to how and why it took place, when it took place, and why it took place. So where are we? So at the time that we had that conjunction with Saturn and Pluto, the Sun was also conjunct Saturn and Pluto at 21 degrees. So it was really close. It was 1 degree away from this conjunction. And so I feel as though it's kind of helping them to bring new things to light as they return over old ground for the next 5 to 6 months. The second half of this year, as I was saying, is about to become full on, as we are being asked to fully realise the consequences of what's taking place on a deeper inner level. To our world and those who believe they have the control and power behind the scenes, as it will become exposed as more and more of the narrative of truth, Jupiter, becomes verbalized louder and louder. And so the Jupiter energy I was talking about, this kind of Saturn, Pluto, both conjuncting this Jupiter. Jupiter is all about truth as well. It's all about justice. It's a higher minded energy. It's about knowledge. It's about wisdom. It's about understanding things from a higher perspective. And so, so I feel as though because the Sun and the Moon are squaring over to this energy in Gemini, they are kind of forcing this kind of narrative change, if you like, forcing this energy from Saturn and Pluto, which is this kind of more controlling, more at the same time kind of power seeking, because Pluto is all about power seeking as well, but it is also transformation. So as it goes through, as it's channeled through this Jupiter kind of energy, it becomes transformed into something that is much more honest and open and truthful. And we will begin to see that kind of play out more and more in the narrative as we go through the second half of this year. And also another thing about Jupiter is it does magnify energy as well. So it will, once this energy really becomes kind of, once it kind of picks up, once this new narrative of awareness kind of becomes more, it feels like a chain reaction somehow. It feels like, you know, as we get out, because Gemini energy is all about communication, it's all about sociability, it's all about wanting to be out there, chatting to people and exchanging our understanding of life and our kind of, you know, our knowledge and our wisdom. What do we know? What do you know? You know, can you help me understand a bigger picture? Can I help you understand a bigger picture? Have you got the missing part of what's missing from what I understand as well? So Jupiter is going to be kind of magnifying all that energy and kind of saying, here, look, you know, this is the hidden side of what you have yet to kind of understand in many ways. And it's going to be putting it out into the bigger consciousness. So Jupiter is kind of blasting it out into the bigger consciousness, and it's going to be picked up by us, those of us who are kind of open enough to receive it, open enough to relate to it, to feel it, to vibrate with it, to resonate with it, and kind of, you know, run with it, do something with it, not just kind of hoard it or kind of, you know, see it as being something that's irrelevant, or, you know, it's those of us that are open to really see and understand the value as well of this message, or these messages that are yet to come, are really going to be kind of putting it out there into a much bigger stage, much bigger kind of audience. So the battle is on and the collective are responding, but we will see a lot of retaliation from those who believe they hold the reins of power because they've held them for so long, but they're not going to be holding them forever. But at this moment in time, of course, we have, you know, the narrative of wanting to control, wanting to make sure people, like I was saying earlier, are doing what they're supposed to do, and that you don't have an option, you don't have the right to say you know, no to this, you have to just go along because those of authority say so. But it does feel like this new moon in Gemini energy is going to set up, like I was saying, this chain reaction that can't be stopped. It won't be held back, and it's not going to be broken. It's going to be like, you know, this linking of chain reaction that's just going to get longer and longer and kind of spread everywhere. So while Saturn is still squaring across to Uranus at 8 degrees and 4 minutes, which I also found incredibly interesting numbers, those being the same numbers as the breakdown of the 12th of January, the 8 and the 4. And I was just like, now isn't that interesting? So Saturn is still squaring Uranus at the same energy. And it is still keeping that planet of change and freedom and liberation at bay. But now that Saturn has gone retrograde and is going more introspective and kind of much more internal, because it's turned retro, and he's now kind of focusing much more inwardly on his own kind of story and kind of try to make sense of what's gone on, and also he's still in Aquarius. So he's also trying to make sense of the bigger picture as well. But he is going to move back into Capricorn, which will also change the energy again for the next 6 months, because we have recently, when he moved into Aquarius, the energy shifted to being more kind of, well, less dense and more I wouldn't say freedom orientated, because literally when Saturn moved into Aquarius, the lockdown started. That was it. That was the point of the lockdown, really. But at the same time, there wasn't that same heaviness and that same denseness. It was like it lifted somehow. Things became kind of easier in some ways. Had that kind of lockdown energy happened in Capricorn, it would have been really hard, really dense, almost like being shut in a prison. But because it happened in Aquarius, it wasn't quite so prison-like. It was like we could cope with it better, we could deal with it better. And many people that I've spoken to have said, you know, oh, it's just like being on a long vacation. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it was in Aquarius. Had it, like I said, been in Capricorn energy, we would have literally felt like, you know, we were in a tower or a dungeon type situation, which would not have been good or pleasant. So, you know, the universe kind of has it all worked out. It really truly does. And the more you look into it on an astrological level, the more you can see how brilliantly it kind of all fits together and how it all works and all connects, and there is no kind of separation from any of it, or nothing happens that shouldn't, really. So so Saturn is kind of becoming less of a tyrant and a control freak, and a little bit more lenient in his kind of way of being. And as we are coming out of this inner dialogue, as well, or as we move forward and come out from this inner dialogue during this new moon period, and where we've been questioning in our own heads as to how we actually feel about everything during this new moon in Gemini, we will naturally become a lot more sociable, as I was saying, and communicative, and ready to express what we've learned through this time as well. So this is a big time for Gemini energy in general. We've got the Sun, the Moon, Mercury and Venus all in Gemini, and all of those four planets are personal planets, are all inner, what's known as inner planets. They are personal planets to us. They work on a kind of day-to-day basis. But as well as those planets all being in Gemini, we do also now have the north node of the moon in Gemini as well. So for the next 18 months, while the node works its way through Gemini, we are going to be very much focused in that Gemini energy. And our attention is going to be on things that Gemini rules, like education, learning, teaching, and young children, or the younger generation in general. We have just spent the last 18 months with the North Node in Cancer, where the direction was all about the home, security, family, mother, childhood, all those things that are very Cancer ruled things, very kind of like intimate, sensitivity, all those things that make us kind of feel warm and fuzzy. And the things also that we all need as well on some level, you know, we all need homes, we all need security, we all need family, we all need, you know, to be mothered, taken care of, nurtured, looked after. And all these things kind of happened early on in our childhood as well. So, or hopefully they do, for, you know, if we're lucky enough to experience those things. But I do find it incredibly interesting, again, talking about how well astrology reflects us, or how well we reflect it. That as we got to the very last degrees of Cancer with the North Node, and the North Node was just kind of preparing itself to leave all that Cancer energy and move into the Gemini energy, bam, immediately, again, lockdown. And I just, you know, it's like, not only did we have Saturn move into Aquarius, which kind of brought in that lockdown, but at the same time, in the last degrees of Cancer, that's when it took place as well. So what happened in lockdown? We are stuck in our homes for security reasons and safety reasons. We're with our family. And many women are once again allowed to feel how it feels, or to know how it feels to be a full-time mother again, or maybe even for the first time in their lives. A lot of mothers don't get to experience that because they've got to go to work and they've got to do, you know, be able to pay the rent and the bills and so many, you know, the price of everything these days. It's like, you know, at one time women would stay at home and look after the children, but then mortgages had to be paid, everything became more expensive, blah, 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 blah. Women had to go out to work. There's a whole other story behind that, which does say that after the Second World War, they realised that there was this massive tax bracket, shall we say, that they had missed out up until that point, because until then men went out to work, women traditionally stayed at home, looked after and brought up the children, and there was a different, like, the tax only came from the men because there was no real, like, there wasn't that many women out there at that time. So they decided to try and get women into work, and they did it very subtly by using the idea of female liberation, like female equality. So that is a whole nother story, but it did change the dynamic because women had to go to work and leave their child with somebody else to look after. So at this particular time in lockdown, we've gone through, you know, being in our homes for safety and security reasons, becoming mothers again. Like I said, for many women, it's the first time that they've been full-time mothers and that the children have been with them for that period or length of time, and the experience of actually being around their own children for full days on end is a complete kind of misnomer for many women who haven't been allowed to experience that. And another thing that goes along with that is the fact that they haven't had to feel guilty about doing that either. And guilt is another Cancerian trait as well, I will just add. So I just find it very amazing that all the things that kind of Cancer represents are all the things that we have just kind of been forced into, just as Cancer is being like exited by the North Node. So as we move into Gemini, I personally believe that we are going to see a lot of outpouring of emotions and non-acceptance at the idea of how our children are supposed to be treated when returning to school. And I really do think this is going to be a biggie. I think there's going to be a lot of outrage here. I think there's going to be a lot of verbalization. I think there's going to be a lot of highly charged like I say, just non-acceptance, just like, you know, a lot of mothers saying no, you know, this isn't acceptable, this is not acceptable to do this to my children. And they're going to stand up against this kind of social distancing idea of when your child goes back to school, it has to be in a certain kind of distance, literally, from all other children as well. Because this is very psychologically and emotionally very disturbing to children as well. And also very challenging for them as well, because children want to run, they want to play, they want the space, they want the freedom. You know, it's all learning, and all of these things are being restricted. So I feel that on some level, we're going to see a lot more homeschooling, that there will be a lot more mothers kind of choosing to stay at home if they can and do more homeschooling with their children, even though the education system is kind of pushing half and half school and half homeschooling. I think there may be a tipping point where some, and I think a lot, quite a lot of mothers are going to say, right, okay, well, I'll just keep my child at home then. If, you know, from going from the home experience of kind of, you know, the loving family into the experience of almost like a prison in many ways. And there is a kind of, interestingly, a school of thought that says that schools are like prisons, and they have become a lot more kind of sterile and a lot more just about, you know, teaching a child to obey and learn to repeat rather than actually educate and actually teach them what they need to know in life. And I think that there's going to be this shift, and that it's going to become more apparent, the kind of difference between the home life and the school life is going to become a lot more obvious. And I think on some level it's going to shift the perception of how teaching should be, how, you know, the classroom, the learning, the whole process, how it should be, and that smaller schools as well will kind of become the new normal, the new norm, as they say. So the challenge of these times as well, I feel, is to take the best of what we previously had and bring it into the world that is yet to be birthed, as we can never return or go back to the same place. And Saturn and Pluto have kind of really made sure of that. That is a no going back energy point. It's like that was the point of no return. That is the point of forward only. Energies are forever shifting, growing, transforming, as nothing ever stays the same. But the shift into a higher consciousness involves letting go of a lot of baggage in order to create something different that contains the essence of our previous experiences, from which we have learnt and grown, and not necessarily from our own lives alone. So that's also about, you know, what it is that our ancestors have been through as well. What did they go through in order for us to be able to have our freedoms and our lifestyles? What did they have to suffer in order for us to be able to have what we have? And how quickly we can kind of lose it as well if we allow that to happen. And so it's about bringing into the new, yet to emerge world we are creating And also, if it does involve a life full of technology, which it probably will, because we are going to be moving more into the Aquarian age of technology, of innovation, of kind of, you know, a very much more, how can I put it, much more connected to everything world, then we need to make sure that the technology is going to work for us and we are not going to work for it, because that's another thing as well, is the way that it can be sold to us as if it's a real kind of, you know, boon to us and that we're going to get so much out of it, when in fact, you know, we could be the ones that are losing out in many ways, particularly about over our health as well. And these are all things that need to be discussed and verbalized and communicated. And I think that, you know, over this next 6 months, 18 months especially, this is the kind of thing that is going to come up more and more and more. So lastly, this new moon is a time of questioning, and one of the dualistic concepts coming through for me, I kept getting this picture of the devil and the angel. The little devil and the little angel sitting on the shoulder, like you used to see in the old cartoons. And one is offering fear and despair and self-deception, and the other one offers awareness, higher frequency and connection with the divine, and everything kind of being connected on a spiritual level. And again, that also goes along with the energies that I've spoken about recently, about Gemini being the manifestation energy of Mercury as well, being the manifestation magician energy, but also the trickster energy as well at the same time, the kind of delusional side, the kind of like being tricked into something that isn't as good as it first appears. And so lastly, the question for me is, you know, asking ourselves, which one will we choose to manifest with? And so with that, I'm going to finish that part of the reading. I will quickly show you these two cards which I pulled. I pulled this one because the moon is in mutable energy of Gemini, and so it's saying nothing is yet set in stone, which is very true, because Gemini is very flexible, very changeable. Things haven't actually become solid, become, like it says, set in stone. There is still plenty of time. This is just early stages of what we're moving through and what we're birthing collectively. And the new moon in Gemini is saying communication is the key. So that, I feel, is really, you know, like communication is the key, and as yet nothing is set in stone. It is all kind of in flux. It's all kind of still, like I say, you know, being decided, everything kind of backwards and forwards, and no real decisions being made at this time. And very quickly I pulled 5 reflection cards. I just want to quickly read them to you. It says, when you receive channeled information, know what it is. Know it is a union of light force. Know it is a combination of you and God. That's the first one. Secondly, and when I say God, I actually kind of relate more to, I like to say the universe rather than, you know, like universe source energy, which is also known as God by many people as well. But for me, I kind of find that too limiting. It doesn't have enough vastness about it. It doesn't have enough kind of magnificence about it for me. It has a kind of connotation that I'm not particularly keen on. So the next card is listen for truth. Truth is truth wherever you hear it. So that's interesting because that kind of relates to the Jupiter energy for me and the truth that is going to be coming through. Fill your soul with light for a few minutes, at least once a day, to still the clear lake of the soul. So this is very kind of contemplative Neptune Piscean energy as well, that kind of letting go, filling yourself with the light. At last your soul is emerging out of darkness into light. There is no turning back. And that again is kind of the, I feel, the Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter energy of the light coming through, the darkness kind of being behind us and moving more into the light, especially as we go forward in the next 6 months. And there is no responsibility more important than your own responsibility to yourself. So I'm going to leave this Gemini new moon reading here and say I hope you've enjoyed it. I will be doing the tarot reading later today, or maybe tomorrow. I will lay the cards out later today and I'll probably read it tomorrow. Please, if you like this video, I don't know where that came from, thumbs it up for me, because then it can get out to the bigger kind of YouTube world and get picked up by the algorithms, and more people get to see it, more people come back to my channel. Hopefully my channel gets more subscriptions and I can help it to grow that way as well, or you can help it grow for me that way as well, which I really do appreciate. Thank you very much to anybody who has liked my videos so far, and all those of you who have thumbed it up and subscribed. Really do appreciate it. Please also tap that little bell so that you can get the future videos that I will be putting out there. I have not managed to get the Pisces video, the Aries video done yet, and I know we're now in Gemini season and I need to get that one done as well, but I have had a really stressful week, and I kind of knew a wee while back that it wasn't going to happen, it wasn't going to take place, because I can remember kind of saying on one of my videos, you know, that's if I managed to do it. So I kind of had a kind of intuitive inclination that that was going to be the case, and it has turned out to be so. So again, just share this video if you feel that the information is worth knowing and that there's people that you know that may well appreciate hearing it as well. And I will really appreciate that too. In the meantime, please enjoy the rest of this weekend, as it's a Friday today, and take care of yourselves during this difficult time and everybody else that you can.